Easy.
There you go, and 3, 2,
About 1973, I quit the construction business and started a company called Trench Shoring Company, which is my primary business today. And my oldest son, our oldest son, my wife and I, Sharon, and our oldest son runs the company. But anyway, I still had this lingering fascination with automobile racing and kept my ear to the ground and you know, would always watch the Indianapolis 500 and dream about, you know, it and participating like my dad did in the 50s. But it was still some, if I could say it this way, a figment of my imagination. Um, and as time went on and business became what it was, I was able to get more and more away from the company and allow my son to run it. And that gave me time to go off and do other things. And one of them was collecting race cars. I never really knew what a hobby was until I started collecting cars. Every now and then you'd fill out a form for some reason and they'd ask you your hobby, and I'd say, well, you know, I fish a couple of 3 times a year and I play golf maybe once a month, so I put down fishing and golf. I mean, in relationship to this thing that's totally consumed me, I had no idea what a hobby was. And the interesting thing about this hobby, over and above the collecting, is the fact that I've do a lot of vintage racing. And that is probably against my dad's better judgment, but he was dead about 25 years when I decided to take a 3-day driving school at Sears Point, Skip Barber. And I figured after that, for 25 years, he's been gone close to 40 now, but after 25 years, I'm sitting there going, you know, maybe he won't mind. And I went over and took this class of Formula Ford at Sears Point, and it was everything I ever imagined. And I've never looked back. That was 1992. I bought my first car in 1992, and being that I was always around these big cars and things like that, I bought a big car. And I would take and practice with it at Willow Springs, and eventually I got to the point I thought I could do some vintage racing, so I joined the vintage racing group, Vintage Auto Racing Association, and did my first race in November of '96 in Palm Springs with a 1986 March. I had about as much business being in that car as I do jumping off this chair and going to the moon. But anyway, I showed up, they dropped a green flag, I didn't know what happened. And struggled through that with cars that were not the right kind of cars, and eventually got me a smaller car, and I've mentioned that my favorite car is a little Brabham BT18. And I've raced all over the world, some of the most famous racetracks in the world. I'm a fairly respectable vintage race car driver. And the thing that got me there was not those big cars, which I eventually was able to do pretty well in, but it was the little Brabham BT18, a little 4-cylinder, 900-pound car that really taught me how to drive. And along with the driving and enjoying that and showing my cars, you know, is the hunt for those special cars that you're always looking for. When you first get started, you got to have one of everything, it seems like. and I took that fairly seriously. But you know, as you continue to collect, your focus becomes much more narrowed, and you're really looking for that car of special interest to racing in general, but particularly to you. And luckily, I have some of those cars. The car that my dad had in the 50s that he ran in Indianapolis was built by Bob Pankratz, and I cannot find that car. And it's kind of like, I don't really mean to equate it like this, but giving an analogy, it'd be like losing a child and not know what happened to that person. You know, I feel the same way about it. It was so special and so close to me because anytime I wasn't in school or doing homework, I was down at the shop where Bob Pankratz was building it, and became basically a part of me. And then to get to see the thing race at Indianapolis in 1954 was also very special. So would love to find that car someday, but the chances are getting more remote each day as each day passes. And that would really be a feather in my cap. But I'm happy with what I have. There's very special cars here. I've had very knowledgeable people come into my shop and just can't not get over the assortment of different cars that I have and the history behind each one of them. And it's very special to me in my own way, and I'm just thrilled that I had a dad like I did, and he was able to share that with me.
Good.